Hey everyone, welcome to this week's Digital Foundry Direct Weekly. It's the kind of weekly discussion show where we chat about the news, talk about the projects we're working on, and of course, take questions from our Patreon supporters. So, joining me this week, John Linneman.
Hey Rich, how's it going?
Absolutely fantastic. A lot to get through, so I'll quickly shift on to our second contributor, Alex Battaglia.
Hey there, Rich. Had my caffeine in this very interesting little mug here, and I'm doing well.
It's nice to see that we're all fully on brand this week.
That's right. We're showing our own brand.
Okay, well, let's get to it. Let's talk about the news. Last week, which is kind of this week as we film it, Microsoft announced the latest wave of FPS Boost titles for Xbox Series X and S consoles. And it's a fascinating one because I suspect the majority of the audience probably won't see any benefit from them. But for those who have 120 hertz capable displays, it's party time. Let's talk about the titles first of all. We've got all of the Battlefields, 1, 4, and V5. We've got both of the Battlefronts. We've got all of the Plant vs. Zombies games and a couple of others. But I guess the most exciting from my perspective was Titanfall 2, which is now fully armed and operational at 120 hertz. So, John, what do you reckon?
Well, let's not forget Mirror's Edge Catalyst.
Oh, baby.
Oh, of course, yeah.
That's another. I mean, I'd take that over any of the Battlefield games, but but yeah, I mean, Titanfall 2 is kind of a big one for me, and I haven't really had much of a chance to play with this yet as of recording this. But Tom shared a bunch of his footage, and it's looking great. I mean, I love to see these kind of upgrades because 120 hertz is a huge deal, and applying that to last generation games is a kind of a smart move because the power is there to push them up, I'd say, pretty high. And yeah, I mean, most of these games are pretty fast paced as well, so they really would benefit from this increased output. So the only downside is some of these games, you have like Battlefield 4 and even Mirror's Edge and a few others that they're limited to the original resolution, I believe, which is, they never received 1x enhancements. So they're all sub 1080p. And Battlefield 4 is just straight 720p, I think, with very poor anti-aliasing. Yeah. But I think, Rich, isn't there something with these games and like the resolution varying from what they are normally?
Yeah, so that is an interesting point. And I think before we get onto that, it's worth pointing out that there is actually a differential here between Series X and Series S. Of all of the titles mentioned, we've got Battlefield 1, 4, and 5 at 120 hertz on Series X, but only Battlefield 4 at 120 hertz on Series S. It kind of makes sense. It's where, the horsepower just isn't there. And so the games that aren't running at 120 hertz on Series S, it is the Battlefield 1 and 5, Mirror's Edge Catalyst, which is a bit of a disappointment, I guess.
Yeah, that's a shame.
Battlefront 2 and Titanfall 1, weirdly enough.
That's weird, yeah. Titanfall 2 is...
Titanfall 2 is...
Well, Titanfall 1 is like, what? Isn't that... with 4 times MSAA.
792p.
Yeah, I wonder if it's literally just because it's using MSAA at that resolution, which would drop the frame rate, because the GPU is the thing getting in the way there on Xbox Series S, which is why Battlefield 1 at 720p can just be fine, while Battlefield, Battlefield 4 at 720p should be fine, but other titles should not. It is a little curious though. That that Series X, we were looking at some of the frame rate things here, is I'd imagine on Series X, do we know if they can do like the high-chi method or whatever it's called, essentially the upscaling of games like they've done for the backwards compatibility catalog, sometimes increasing the resolution to 4x or 9x of the original. Do we know if that's possible on third-party developer titles from the Xbox One series?
Sure.
Yeah.
I don't see any reason why not, because it's at the system level. But the high
We've never seen this yet, though. Like you and I saw it, Rich. They demonstrated it to us, but I don't think any titles released so far like Xbox One titles have received this boost yet.
Yeah, I think, when we're looking at the Xbox One X titles that are boosted to 120 hertz, on Series X they're running at what Microsoft describes as a slightly lower resolution. We've not actually done the measurements as of this filming, but it looks to me like it's almost like an either-or thing. There is a horsepower limit in back compat mode, so actually getting both 4x resolution and 2x frame rate could be quite challenging, I think.
I was thinking more for like the Battlefield 4 situation where it's 720p and 4 times that, 1440p at 120 hertz on that big GCN kind of back compat mode. It seems reasonable, but
Yeah, I'd say it's a reasonable.
I just like how you said big GCN, and now I'm thinking of big Navi. We never got big GCN, did we?
It would have been horrible.
We never did. Well, I think we had some contenders there. Yeah, Radeon 7 is fairly large GCN, shall we say.
Almost big.
Almost big.
But, I'm just really excited to see these titles running at 120 hertz. And I'm also happy to see that there's some level of forward-looking compatibility here. Not everyone at the moment has 120 hertz access on their TVs. But, give it a couple of years and it's going to be a standard feature on new sets across the board.
The thing, Rich, though, I guess the point to keep in mind, though, is that 120 hertz has actually been more widely available than I think we might realize. It's like
monitors.
Going all the way back to like the LG B7 series and up, and a lot of other LG, Samsung, and other brands, they've all supported 120 hertz at 1080p or in some cases 1440p without HDMI 2.1. So I feel like at the very least it's reasonably accessible. Anybody that bought a TV in the last 4 years probably has this capability.
Well, you say that, John, but it's going to be people who bought a high-end set or a mid-range to high-end set in the last 4 years. If it's if they bought like a sort of entry-level 4K screen, they won't have that.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it depends. Some of the lower-end ones do as well. Yeah. But it's a little bit mixed. But I also feel like at this point, I'd imagine that. I'd love to see the numbers actually on what percentage of the people buying the new Xbox Series X or something actually have a mid to high end TV.
Microsoft surely has access to these metrics through their kind of like internal diagnostics. You can choose to, like with Windows or with Xbox, how much information you want to send back. It's one of the options I think you can click on the setup. So that they probably know. I would love to know. Yeah.
Well, they've known this for years. There was I think a stat that Cliffy B came with back in the day where he shared that Gears of War on Xbox 360 was mostly played on standard definition displays, which is entirely consistent with, how the market would have been at that time. But there's a lot of telemetry that's sent through your console back to base that we just don't know about, and I'd love to see. And I guess it's the same for stuff like GeForce Experience and on the Nvidia side, on the PC side. But I'd love to see that data. Maybe one day it shall be shared. But in the meantime, FPS Boost, I'm really looking forward to seeing more. There are a couple of titles here, or actually specifically one by the look of it. Sea of Solitude, that gets boosted to 60 hertz. I've never played that one, so I assume it was 30 hertz when it launched. But no idea. 13 EA Play titles, FPS boosted. And Tom's going to be looking at some of the metrics there. I played Titanfall 2 at 120 hertz last night, ran it through capture, did frame rate analysis on the fly, 120 hertz start to finish throughout the entire intro mission, which is really exciting. So good stuff. Got a 120 hertz screen. There's a lot of love here for you from Microsoft, and that's good stuff. Okay, so let's move on. Second news item. I can hear the rejoicing of John Linneman here. Sony is keeping the Vita and the PlayStation 3 digital stores open. So, John, I've got to get your reaction on this.
I mean, I'm genuinely surprised and very happy to see this. And to me, it just demonstrates why it's important to, when the consumer base has an issue with something like this, make your voice heard, because clearly companies do listen. They don't always respond, but in this case they did. And yeah, I mean, I've talked about this before. I'm a big collector of physical games, but there's a lot of digital exclusive games on these machines, and I think keeping them accessible to people to allow them to purchase, especially in Vita, where there were still games in development. I know for sure that some companies are still seeing sales of recent games on there, but you know, I'd like them to get it to a place where they can just leave this stuff online without too much of an investment on the back end and just kind of keep it going.
It is curious though why the PSP store could not be saved when something so small as the PS3 or Vita one could.
I assume that the PSP store, it comes from such a different time, you know what I mean? And that I could see technical reasons for it, because I think already it was like something where you couldn't access the store on PSP anymore. As it is, you had to use a PS3 to do it and then like connect it via USB. But PSP itself, aside from the Go, was never that digital, to be honest. And nearly every game came out on UMD. So, but the other systems, PS3 is when they really went digital, and I think it's important to keep that stuff available, and also basically, you know, it kind of fights back against this concern over things closing on us, although it shows that it could definitely happen at any point, but they cared enough to stop it this time, and that's good.
I'm just concerned that it's like a stay of execution.
Yeah, I guess that's the big worry. I wish there was some way to like I don't know what their back end looks like. I'm sure one of the reasons they wanted to get rid of this is because it's all very old code and server stuff running in the background that they didn't want to keep. And I'm sure there's issues with, you know, accounts, and there's already two-factor authentication is slightly tricky with the PS3. But still, I don't think they'd invest the money into it, but I'd love to see them sort of like refresh the store itself on those platforms and make it sort of more functional within a new framework or something. I don't know. But either way, I'm happy to see it for now, and I hope it remains open for years to come.
Yeah, I think there's just got to be, you know, I've got no problem at all with the stores closing down as long as there is a preservation mechanism. And there was no plan for this as far as I could see. You could still download your purchases, which is fair enough, but how long is that going to work for? And yeah, and you know, I think there needs to be some kind of long-term vault plan, if you like, you know, to basically make sure that there is accessibility to those titles, even if, you know, because let's face it, these storefront code, it's going to go wrong at some point. Engineering effort is going to be needed to get it working again. The people who devised the code might not even be working at Sony anymore. So you've got this huge sort of legacy technical debt to take care of. And I suspect that was one of the reasons why it was scheduled for the chop. But, you know, I just can't help but feel that on the one hand, it is a stay of execution, and that, you know, give it a couple of years, we'll be back in the same position again. And there's got to be more of a long-term plan in preserving what is an absolutely remarkable catalogue of titles. And, you know, I'll put it to you that if a bunch of hackers out there can do it, so can Sony. So I think sort of leading on to that news, there's been a lot of talk about potential issues with the PlayStation 4, perhaps even the PlayStation 5, about the fact that games could just stop working in a series of if a series of conditions are met concerning the CMOS battery. So maybe you can talk us through that, John.
Yeah, so this applies to PlayStation 3, 4, and 5. And the essential notion is, and it's slightly different between them, I should note, is that when the CMOS battery dies and you change it, or if you don't change it, essentially the system needs to authenticate with a time server to set the time. And the theory, from what I recall, and maybe this is actually a known thing at this point, is that it's tied to the trophy system and to prevent cheating, and like keep them synchronized if you're playing offline. So it might be connected to that. But the idea is, like, let's say your PS4 battery dies, you replace it, bring it back up. The the server's gone, let's say theoretically, which is actually the real concern, or you can't connect it right away, basically. If it can't authenticate, then what that means is that you won't be able to play any content on your PS4, disc or digital. Whereas on PlayStation 3, I believe it's discs work no matter what, but digital stuff does not, which we saw during that one, the apocalypse with the PS, it's that kind of situation. And then I think on PS5 it's actually mixed, where digital stuff is not working. Somebody tested this by disconnecting the battery, actually. It should be noted. None of them have died yet on the PS5. But they noticed that digital stopped working and some discs worked, some discs did not. It was kind of split. So it's kind of uncertain what's going on there. Yeah. And batteries they're an unfortunate thing. Batteries cause so many long-term problems for preserving old hardware, and any machine that has had batteries in it, anybody that works with old PCs or old machines that have this stuff knows that one, certain types like the barrel style batteries can cause corrosion and damage the hardware. So that's bad. These disc style batteries usually aren't too bad for that, but they can take out system functions. Like on Sega Saturn, when your battery dies, you lose all saves. Which is bad, unless you have like a RAM cartridge. But they have a changeable compartment in the back. The CDI has a battery built into an IC, the timekeeper chip, and when that thing dies, you literally have to Dremel open the chip and then like remove the battery and then reconnect it with new terminals. It's a huge pain in the butt. Wow. Whereas on the PS3 and upwards, it just seems like all of this is just tied to essentially restricting access to software. And as far as I know, the one solution around it right now, at least, is to jailbreak the system. And that's it's good at that is an option, but I feel like that shouldn't have to be an option. And, people are saying this isn't a big deal. No big deal. These batteries last for a long time. And they can. I've seen PS4s already die. PS3s for sure. Some of them last longer. PS2 has a battery as well. When that dies, you just lose the clock, but that's pretty much it. But I would love Sony to come up with some sort of solution here, to some sort of a fail-safe or a fallback to ensure that you don't actually need this server connection to bring the system back up online. Maybe it's invalidate trophies when if you get a trophy when you're in this state, maybe don't allow it to, persist or something like that. But I feel like just for the good of the future of these platforms, it would be very, very nice to see them actually sort of try to solve this now. And that's why it's being raised right now, because it's not yet a problem, but it absolutely could be. We know now what happens when this occurs. So the time is now to act.
I think it's basically, there's a specific issue with the PlayStation consoles, but a general issue is that I think nobody has really thought about what happens when these servers aren't there anymore.
And by the way, Rich, this is also
applies to Microsoft, of course.
Yeah, Microsoft has their own issue there as well. And again, this one's a little different, but it's, if you try to get a new machine or you do a factory restore on an Xbox, it also needs a server before you can bring it back up. And that has not been hacked. It's basically a paperweight. So both companies have to deal with this. Most consumers aren't going to care. They're not going to see it. They think that we're crazy for talking about it. But anybody that's into preserving this stuff to playing these games long term, like this is important things. And they need to consider what happens if, and possibly when, I don't know, these servers go offline.
This is a hard one though, I almost feel, because there's already all of these consoles out there that were manufactured with the baseline software that requires these checks. And if these things are never updated, that means if they never update the hardware software integration on the Microsoft side for years, like let's say 3 years now, and then they get rid of this online activation time check server update thing, that means all the consoles before then will still have this problem. I actually don't know what they do. Same thing with the Sony side, technically. It feels like that should never have been there in the first place. Like if
that's why they got it. The sooner they act, the better.
Yeah,
now
they needed
because
to
the clock is ticking.
They needed to do it really quickly. If I had a PC hardware that had any of these problems, I mean, yes, there are technically like online authentication things for certain programs, but that's very different than the hardware bricking itself.
That's a different thing.
So I don't know. I really hope they move really quickly on both sides, and we should, I think, periodically keep bringing this up because I think it's a really big deal. But yeah.
Yeah, I think it is just basically, I can go onto, for example, eBay or Facebook Marketplace. I could buy an Atari VCS and it's just going to work. This is like late 70s technology. I've got no problem with it working, but it's there. I can go out and grab it and it will just work. Now, if we apply the same kind of time scale, the same sort of 40-year gap for the consoles of today, are they going to work? I wouldn't put money on it. That's the thing. That is why preservation is so important.
Yeah, the last ones I think that would work just straight away is something like the Wii.
the Wii, that little controller.
Shit.
I mean, maybe the Wii U. I mean, that's trickier because it has that gamepad with the extra battery in it, but you can still plug it in. I think that's fine. And the Switch, technically, I don't think has any of these authentication issues. Its problem is that it has an internal battery, and when that dies, the system cannot be started. So we need to figure out a solution for the battery problem on that as well. And maybe somebody already has. I haven't looked into it lately, but that's a separate thing.
Yeah, and of course there's a huge digital footprint on the Switch to the point where there's physical games that require downloads for you to get all the content. So
that's true. Though that stuff's usually, fortunately, still marked, so from the package if it's actually a useful thing or not.
Yeah, but it is a crazy thing, though. The Switch has been hacked. and therefore, I'm not particularly concerned about preservation on the Switch.
No, it's just about keeping the hardware running long term more than anything else. And that's, it's looking mostly good.
But I think the actual news that there was for this item was, going back to the news, was that Sony is reportedly looking into the CMOS issue. It did look like, tracing that back to the source, it did look like a, yes, we're looking at it, please go away kind of response. But fingers crossed that it's not, that it is being taken seriously. And
well, if they reopened the PS3 and Vita store, well, more like never closed it in the end. They reversed decision on that. It's pretty clear that they're looking at community feedback right now. And so this is our best hope for this kind of thing. So they are actually aware that people are concerned about this and act on it. And if they actually find a way to solve this, then it's good for everybody.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next topic. And we're going to be talking about some of the more developer-orientated events that have been happening. Last week, we talked about Nvidia GTC. We're going to circle back to that shortly because there was stuff we didn't cover. But we had Gamestack this week. Gamestack
live.
And some interesting stuff there. I guess there was Microsoft talking about, I think it was the Agility SDK.
Yeah, that's the cool thing from my perspective. The other things are cool there too, but the Agility SDK for PC side, and it does have an effect on Xbox as well, of course, is that essentially before and since the dawn of DirectX, other than like a CD install, you would essentially have to update Windows to take advantage of new DirectX features, usually. And now with this Agility SDK covering a DirectX 12 Ultimate and the new shader model 6.6, developers can essentially ship you the DX update with their game code instead of having to wait for users to just, whenever they want, update Windows. So this means with every game release, a developer can now take advantage of the latest versions of DirectX and all the advantages that has. And like DirectX 12 Ultimate or shader model 6.6, they are going to end up being huge things. So new games don't have to worry about legacy users for essentially forever now. And it's really great. And this will mean specifically, I think for at first Microsoft products, specifically like their first party studios like 343, the Coalition, and any of their other ones, that when they ship a new game, in the next like 2 years that we're going to see the latest DX12 features in them regardless of anything, because they now know they have a perfectly big install base. And this is great for Xbox users because that means technically the PC user base will not be dictating the amount of high-end features that are going to be put into Xbox games, because sometimes it's always like that fear of parity. Like, do we really want to develop all of this, spend this time developing a feature that can only be used in the Xbox Series version and like a couple of PCs? Well, no, they don't have to worry about that anymore, because all Xboxes, Series Xboxes, and all PCs now will just get it due to the fact that agility exists. So I think this is excellent. I guess the other kind of thing there was a lot of things that were talked about at the Gamestack Lab. I have not watched them all yet, or because I've been busy with something behind the scenes, which people will see hopefully in this upcoming week when you watch this video. They announced, or it was a couple of demonstrations for AMD's fidelity effects on series consoles, Rich.
Right. Yeah, it looks as though they're bringing over a lot of the GPU open stuff that AMD has done onto Xbox. And initially I was kind of confused by this because by its very nature, GPU open is open. So, if you wanted to take something from Fidelity Effects and put it in your Xbox game or indeed your PlayStation 4 game, you could take that code and then do the port yourself. I can only assume that elements of Fidelity Effects that may benefit from specific hardware features or APIs within the Xbox-specific hardware and software stack is actually more easily accessible now, which makes more of these features more kind of plug in and play. And we actually get quite a lot of people asking why we don't talk more about Fidelity Effects. And there is often a kind of confusion. There's like people are lumping in Fidelity Effects alongside RTX features on the Nvidia side, but they're two very different things. So maybe you can clear that one up.
AMD's Fidelity Effects as a part of GPU Open is a variety of plug and play post-processing effects usually. So there's a denoiser for like reflections and shadows. There's a VRS Tier 2 implementation, which is pretty great. And there's screen space ambient occlusion, screen space reflections, Fidelity Effects sharpening, contrast adaptive sharpening. And in the future, they will keep adding presumably more of these things. And one of them will end up being the equivalent of a deep learning super sampling competitor from the AMD side. And we'll have to wait and see what that's like. But that's essentially what this is, this plug and play package of post-processing effects that developers can use at will if they want for their games. And actually, we've already seen the benefits of this, not just on Xbox consoles, but we've also seen it on PlayStation ones before in the past. What was it called? TressFX essentially was like a slight precursor to this, and TressFX found its way into PlayStation titles. It found its way technically into Horizon Zero Dawn. It's been used before, but the reason why I guess this is interesting that it was kind of brought into Gamestack Live and announced here is because, like Rich was saying, these are Xbox Series tailored versions of these effects that will take advantage of RDNA 2, like the Tier 2 VRS, for example, which will obviously only work in the DirectX environment because they have the API for this and the hardware support. So that's the cool thing about that. In the future,
one interesting thing, Alex, I saw. I assume that this is just a general, but in the credits for Resident Evil Village on the PS5 demo, they referenced several Fidelity Effects features such as contrast adaptive sharpening, and I guess I was a little bit confused as to whether this was just covering the game as a whole and specifically only applies to specific versions, or if this is actually part of the PS5 version as well.
It's going to totally be in the PS5 version. I'm pretty sure as well, if you look at Marvel's Avengers, they use Fidelity Effects CAS on PC. I'm very positive of that. And if you go to the console versions on every single version in the menu, I think there's a sharpness option there that you can toggle.
It's probably
I'm pretty sure it's CAS. If it's not, it's like, what's the point?
You're probably right.
So
exactly,
that just means they had to adapt the code for CAS to work with the PlayStation version. So they had an extra step there, probably. maybe it was machine translated, maybe it was actually, manually done, who knows. But this is just good because it's automated, essentially. There's already made versions of this for Xbox consoles.
That's cool.
Well, this is interesting stuff because I do think there is going to be an implementation phase for RDNA2 features, because we're not seeing a whole bunch of them at the moment, and Microsoft are probably thinking to themselves, what can we do to actually spur more people to use stuff like Tier 2 VRS and stuff that the Xbox console definitely has, and that developers may not naturally gravitate towards because it's not within PlayStation 5.
Yeah.
So it's a good call to actually not just do that, but also to unify it across PC and Xbox as well.
Yeah, it's similar to I guess Nvidia wanting to take advantage of the advantages they have in software and hardware by making DLSS more approachable, easily plugged in, like they did with 2.1 or 2.0, as well as releasing as part of UE4, and as well as kind of them having their own suite of denoisers. The difference, though, that should be noted, and I think it's very good that AMD does this, is that this is open source stuff. So it's there's no need to license or anything like that. I just saw on Twitter this morning, or was it yesterday evening? I can't remember now. But our good friend, whose last name I cannot pronounce so easily, Tomasz, who also worked on like Alien Isolation and also was for a while at Frostbite, and I think now is, I can't remember his name. I'll send the link to Audi. It was basically showing immediately after this was announced at Gamestack Live, he went into his toy renderer, which is a ray tracer and has like a lot of really cool elements in it, plugged in the shadow denoising code within like 2 hours and got it working. This is powerful, and it's going to be cheap. It's going to run well, presumably. Who knows how well it runs across different hardware types, because it is obviously an AMD effort, but it's just easy to do. And that's really great. And he had no problem with it. There was no licensing phase or anything like that. That's something I think at times NVIDIA really should try and learn from. And I do hope to see that for certain RTX things in the future. Like it's very unreasonable. I don't think they'll do it, but I really think DLSS should go open source to a certain degree, because regardless of what happens, NVIDIA will have the hardware advantage to run DLSS at the best quality, at the best performance. That's really all that matters. People are still going to care about DLSS for NVIDIA, but then it'll allow other users to see what the advantages of that are, and maybe also be able to run it too, and see. It'll just make innovation a little bit better too, because maybe then there can be iterations on DLSS outside of NVIDIA. I don't know, just
Do we have any ETA on when AMD's competitor for DLSS
this year
is set to arrive? It's this year.
Yeah,
sometime.
Could mean anything really, but this year apparently.
All right.
Yeah, cool. I agree with you, Alex, about DLSS. I mean, it's just been integrated into Modern Warfare, Warzone specifically, I think, which is a really big deal, and it's gaining traction. Last week we talked about how it was integrated now at the nuts and bolts level into Unity, and arguably DLSS is getting far more take-up than DirectX 12 Ultimate features. Well, it's not even up for discussion. It's huge, and all of the big innovations historically in the PC space have been open. They have been set at the API level, and to lock out hardware on something that's so profound, obviously it's happy days for NVIDIA, because it means there's going to be a lot of RTX cards shipped, and it is a great feature. And I can't take away the technological achievement, the effort that went into this. This wasn't just something they imagined up out of thin air. It was like 5 years worth of research and development.
And you look at you look at the nearest competitors, like Facebook Reality Labs is trying to create a DLSS solution, and it's so much more expensive on their implementation, and it is has less quality and all these other things. Like NVIDIA is like so far ahead. So them wanting to leverage their competitive advantage by making it exclusive from a software side, it makes sense. But I do hope like years down the line, 2 maybe, or something like that, maybe 3 years, that we do see this, come into a more open source area. I would like that.
Guess we should round off the stuff from GTC because that was ongoing during last week's filming.
Yeah, there's a number of things to talk about here. I did watch the Crytek presentation about integrating RTX features, and I do recommend a lot of people watch that just to kind of get a sense of how easy it is to integrate DLSS or not, as well as, especially in a really old game like Crysis. Even the updated version is based on something that was made in 2007, so that was interesting. Other than that, there was a Minecraft RTX presentation that was also, I believe, given at Gamestack Live from Ollie Wright, who I talked to. Ollie, he's really wonderful, and his presentation was charming and really, informative. And the Minecraft RTX presentation, they've already talked about it a lot in the past, so they were talking about like the integration of like how they did all these different things. But no, this one was very specific about, I would almost say like, the theory behind what the heck denoising is. Like, it's really hard to get a grasp of what denoising is and how it works. And when everything's path traced, and even the primary geometry is ray traced in something like Minecraft, it takes on like a whole new, you have to think about why the game looks the way it does. And it was a really interesting talk to, grasp what the heck denoising is and why there's like certain problems, like the fact that a tiny little bright light is one of the worst things in denoising. So it's just like a lot of fun to watch through that. And another really great presentation that was very developer focused and also kind of charting a sort of history of the way a game was developed was Rebellion North, talking about their road to bringing, Sniper Elite 4 to the Switch. And they have like a kind of a longer history of bringing a number of games to the Switch. And the interesting part of this is that each time the project became more ambitious due to the scope of the game being bigger in some sense of the word. So they had to constantly keep upgrading their efforts and how they were optimizing the game to get onto Switch each time they released it and building off of that. And with their final game, Sniper Elite 4, they like put it on the Switch. It's like raw code form, and it was getting something like 8 FPS on the GPU side, and like, I don't know, like 18 FPS on the maybe even lower, like 12 FPS on the CPU side. And it was very interesting where they said, we know we can scale the GPU really far. Cut resolution, take off effects, microcode enhancements, whatever. But the CPU side is the literal game itself. So this is where we're going to spend all our effort. And it was amazing to see them track all these little changes. They did like assembly compiler changes. They, was another one that they did, like changing the way a lot of the things are done on the GPU. They went over from Vulkan with NVN extensions into being a pure NVN game. And this is the lowest level API essentially that can be used on Switch. It's directly accessing a lot of features of the Tegra hardware that Vulkan really cannot do without these NVN extensions.
Yeah, most games use this actually
NVN
on the Switch.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well,
it's pretty much like it's the common one that almost every Switch game uses.
I guess they must have really good documentation for it, because it being a lower level API, you'd imagine that it would be.
Oh yeah, I think so for sure.
But they kind of tracked it through and this really cool development update, and how they didn't want to focus on using DRS too much because they wanted to keep the game clean. And it was just a really great presentation that I recommend everyone in the audience take a look at. And it was also kind of fun because they do mention Digital Foundry at one point, and I got a good laugh about that. Yeah.
I think they quoted Tom's review of Sniper Elite 3 was it?
Yeah, it was.
I think it was 3 or 4.
3.
But regardless, it was 3. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I really liked Sniper Elite when I played it on FPS Boost. I hadn't played it before, but the notion of that game being scaled down to a Switch, it's quite a remarkable achievement, I think. Okay, well, that's that. Let's move on to the next topic. So, wow, where do we begin with this one? I think we could, if we kind of show this clip here, which is the traditional Sony interactive splash screen that you see on Uncharted, Horizon Zero Dawn, all of the first-party juggernauts, and then it's running on an Xbox. It's MLB The Show 21, and huge controversy around this because it's a PlayStation Studios title that's running on Xbox One, Xbox Series consoles.
Yeah.
It came out day and date with the PlayStation versions, and also, in a shock twist,
Whoa,
it was available on Game Pass on day one.
It's quite the coup.
Yeah. On the one hand, you could say that it's, a bit of marketing genius, perhaps a bit of cross-platform banter, a bit of a marketing stunt possibly, because Microsoft has been going to town on it. I think we should probably talk a little bit about this. I've actually been looking at the game this week. The video is probably live by the time you see this. There's going to be a lot of misconceptions, a lot of arguments, needless arguments. I think it's pretty clear that MLB is the publisher of this, so Sony wouldn't have been involved in the decision to bring it to Xbox in the first place. They probably wouldn't have been involved in any decisions regarding Game Pass.
Right.
So I guess it comes down to the quality of the code, and what I discovered was pretty simple. It runs faster on PlayStation 5 compared to Series X by quite a margin. But it's not, I suspect, any kind of intent from the developer, a specific intent, because the Xbox One X version runs significantly faster than PlayStation 4 Pro. In all cases, graphics are identical. It's a tricky one. What do you reckon about this, John?
Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion about sort of parity lately, especially with certain statements from a leaked document, which is kind of the wording is very common from what I understand. So there's nothing strange there. I don't think the developers here have any intent to target one platform over the other in terms of like offering greater performance. I just think that's how it's shaken out with whatever efforts they've poured into this one. I'm sure that the thing about when you talk to developers, usually they want the game to run as best as it can on every platform that they ship on, right? Nobody wants to release a product that is lesser on one. And really, in this case, the difference is pretty small, I'd say. I mean, the gap in terms of actual measured performance during those replays specifically, there is a notable percentage there. But as far as how the game itself plays, it's great on all on both of those platforms. Maybe not the lower end machines, but what I'm more curious about is what this meant for the development team, because these guys traditionally have produced one version of the game. In recent years, I guess it's just been PlayStation 4, right? Mm-hmm. So this was the first year where all of a sudden they needed to up their engineering game and now target not just PS4, but PS4, PS5, Xbox One, and Xbox Series consoles, and multiple variants of each. That I can imagine that added quite a bit of work to the development process for these guys. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, I think fundamentally, you're right. This is going to be their first multi-format project. They probably wouldn't have touched an Xbox development kit before.
Exactly.
So, I think one thing to sort of stress is that the games business at the business level is entirely removed from the discourse at the fanboy level. There is no, people out there, who maybe are sort of invested in the sort of Twitter discussions might be thinking to themselves, why does Microsoft work with Digital Foundry when they hate their games? And equally, why does Sony work with Digital Foundry when they hate PlayStation games? The truth is that this is not reality. This is, and similarly, when it comes to MLB The Show being developed cross-platform for the first time, it's pretty clear that they were aiming for parity. The visual makeup of the game is entirely identical between Xbox and PlayStation, and in the respective console classes. So what I will say, though, is that you've got a bit of DualSense love. It's very minimal. There's 3D audio in there. The loading is a little bit faster on PlayStation. Actually, the boot is lightning fast. But beyond that, it's the same game. And I actually think that there's something more curious and more fascinating to discuss here beyond platform comparisons, which is it's not so much a battle of consoles, it's a battle of business models. When you're looking at MLB The Show on PlayStation, I've got to pay full price, and indeed I did pay full price. In fact, I had to pay £75
Oh gosh.
to play both versions, to get the PS4 and the PS5 versions of the game.
Yeah.
They actually charged
separate.
extra for the cross-gen pack, which really did rankle with me, I have to tell you, because it's pretty clear that this is the epitome of a cross-gen title. There's not that much in the way of enhancements on the next-gen machines. It's essentially resolution and frame rate. So to charge extra for that is, didn't really go down particularly well with me. And then on the flip side, Game Pass, I can just download it on any Xbox, on any generation that I want, and I'm straight in.
Yeah.
This is especially true for sports games more than any other genre.
Yes.
Because sports games, like anybody that's buying classic games, you go to anywhere, you're gonna find stacks and stacks of sports games for like a penny, 99 cents, stuff like that. Like nobody wants these games after X amount of time has passed, and which is a little bit sad.
Unless it's Wayne Gretzky's
like,
3D hockey. Am I right there, John?
That's true. Like, who the heck, or NBA Jam?
Yeah, exactly.
Who the heck wants to spend £75 on a baseball game? I mean, okay, maybe I'm being a little bit harsh because I don't care. I don't like baseball.
Well, yeah, I think that's the thing, John. It's basically only the diehards are going to be paying £60 or £75 for the game. Okay, and what Game Pass is doing is basically radically expanding the scope of the audience for that game. Now, there are questions to be asked about the sustainability of the Game Pass business model. That's the big question. And that's again, we know nothing about that. There's zero transparency really about whether this is sustainable or not in the long term. But in the short term, that game is going to get played a lot more, I suspect, on Xbox machines than it is on its original home, which is the PlayStation. Yeah. And I guess the question also is, why did it go multi-platform in the first place? And MLB would have, been saying to themselves, well, hold on a minute here. Why should this game be specific to PlayStation when there are a bunch of other platforms out there that could, that would run the game just as well?
Yeah.
So maybe next year we'll get a Switch version. Actually, so one thing that I did think about is this game is very similar visually between all generations, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like
pretty much, yeah.
And that's a little bit of a disappointment coming from something like NBA,
which is huge,
2K,
yeah.
Whatever, the most recent NBA 2K game that I looked at last year, there was a dramatic visual increase going from the last gen to the current gen version. I mean, they even had a completely new UI, and everything was completely radically altered between the two. Even if, the core gameplay is very much the same, there was a lot of improvements, and I was kind of expecting that here as well, but it doesn't seem like that's the case. That's a shame. I mean, even FIFA got a next gen upgrade with the extremely gorgeous hair rendering features from Frostbite, so it's a little bit disappointing in that sense.
Well, I guess it depends on the budget of the title and the reach of the title and the sales of the title.
Yeah. FIFA's world.
It is a very...
MLB sells well. Yeah, but it? I mean, it's a big.
But like
game.
FIFA, like the entire world plays football. There's like.
I mean, FIFA, yes, but like this is more like NBA territory. Right. I feel.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, a really interesting project for me to work on, just because I was kind of curious to see what was going on there and to see how a PlayStation studio would handle an Xbox. But ultimately it's faster on PlayStation on the new generation, and it's slower on PlayStation in the old generation. So, not really much you can draw conclusions wise there about developer motives or whatnot. It's just a curious thing, I guess.
Yep.
And that's that. So let's talk about the final news item of the week. Apogee is back, it says on the docket. And what is the significance of this, John?
So it seems that, and this is its own entity, not connected to 3D Realms, which was also sort of connected to Apogee back in the day. But this is, Apogee was sort of one of the main drivers, and I guess even the creator maybe of the shareware model back in the day on PCs, or at least, you know, one of the main founders of this, or like, essentially the idea back then was they would release, let's say they build a game and it has like 30 levels. You put out a shareware version that has maybe 7 or 8 levels. So you get a large chunk of the game to play it. And then you can upgrade and buy the full version from there. They used this like crazy back in the day. And Apogee was basically known for delivering console-like experiences on the PC at a time when the PC was barely capable of delivering such things. And that's what they kind of became known for. I mean, if you were into platformers, shooters, you know, all this kind of stuff, Apogee had your back. And there's a lot of fun classic licenses and IP, I guess, that have been sort of like thrown in the closet for decades post that era. And it looks like new Apogee has a couple goals. One, it looks like they're bringing back some of those games, like Monster Bash 3D, or Monster Bash, I guess, is getting a proper like remaster, not 3D, HD, of course. That's what it's called, Monster Bash HD. There's also Raptor Call of the Shadows. It's making a return. But then there's new stuff as well, and it sounds like they're going to be focusing on sort of digging up potentially interesting indie projects, maybe in a way similar to something like, I don't know, I just imagine like a Devolver Digital kind of publisher. And I think we need more like that. That go for a certain kind of game, certain type of aesthetic, certain type of, you know, something. And I'm very curious to see what they come up with.
So Apogee, is it actually anybody who was directly involved with Apogee back in the day spearheading this? Or is it just
Scott?
Oh, so it is. It's not just an IP grab.
It's not, no. It's got some original guys involved. So
nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even the trailer for it had like what's his name? John St. John.
John St. John doing the introducing the brand back. He was the voice of Duke Nukem.
Yeah. So
Duke Nukem 3D. So
it's pretty cool.
He came back to present that. So, you know, not much there to see. It's interesting and kind of fun to see them make that return, I guess. And anybody that was playing PC games in the early 90s is probably a little nostalgic for the Apogee games.
I mean, I'm secretly hoping that there's some sort. I don't know what's going on with the Prey rights at the moment, but I don't know. Let's see what maybe happens with Prey in the next 5 years.
I would love to see Prey itself,
the original Prey,
recreated as it was originally being developed.
I would like that too.
Sounds like a job for Night Dive Studios.
It does.
That's true.
But surely that would all be tied up with Bethesda now. They own Prey.
Oh.
Yeah. That's
that's right. That might be tricky then.
Well, I guess you're going to be keeping an eye on that for us, John. So
yes.
If anything interesting happens, we'll report back on that. But I think that's it for the news this week. So let's move on to discussing some of the stuff we've been working on this week. We can't actually discuss much. We've talked about MLB The Show. We've talked about FPS Boost. A lot of the other stuff we're talking about. Well, Alex, I want you to tease the project you're working on without giving away what it actually is, because we kind of teased it in the sort of production notes on the Patreon site this week.
I guess I would say it's something where I really love the tech, I really love the game, and I really want to spend the time making this video right. So it's one of those projects. And I think anyone who's come to DF and started watching our videos ever since I started coming here will know it's a project that I really like. And if you can probably guess along those lines. So it's something I really like.
It's funny though, you say that, but then all of our patrons were like, wait a minute, is it like Turok remade in the CryEngine?
You know, there's a limited selection of things that I like. Let's say I'm a man of particular tastes.
Well, this opens up an interesting question, Alex. So, what if Turok came to the CryEngine? Possibly you could find a nano suit
It would
within the game. What would be the ultimate Battaglia fan service?
That would be along the lines like the year is 2009, and they've, instead of making Turok, that really weird version of Turok that they made. When did that come out, John? Like 2008, I want to say. 2008. Instead of making that, they used CryEngine 2 at that time, stripped out a lot of the modern crap, and just made an awesome Turok game. I would love that. They could still do that now, just with the latest version of CryEngine. Why not?
Could there be such a thing as a Crysis RTS?
Yes, there is. I mean, technically, yes. There's a lot of reasons, yes, but the power struggle multiplayer of Crysis 1, the CryEngine 2 game, was actually essentially a first-person RTS. You would take over parts of the map, grab power, research upgrades, and unlock new vehicles. It was essentially like a multiplayer RTS from the first-person perspective. Very different than like a Battlefield in that way, because there's no kind of progression in those games. Very cool. Yes, someone should do it.
Dude, actually, more than that, I'd actually like to see a turn-based Crysis. Like in the vein of maybe like
XCOM?
An XCOM style game.
Yeah.
Like I feel like with the nanosuit stuff, you'd have like the full squad
Raptor team
from the original Crysis. It starts in the plane, you land, and then you all come together, and it's like, I feel like that would be really cool. And
you'd lose like 2 of the squad members within the first 10 minutes of the game.
It could be like an alternate history where what would happen if you were in control of them.
I'd like that.
Well, I'm all in on the Crysis text adventure. If we're going really old school.
Yeah.
I know I can read it and be like, read it slow. $50 says this Rosenthal fellow ain't the reason we're here.
What would you like to respond with? It's cold.
Examine,
really cold,
examine foliage that's running at half frame rate.
Oh.
Anyway, I think, all I'm going to say about your content, which I'm really excited about, Alex, is that it's not Crysis, which kind of just invalidates this entire conversation. But yeah, let's move on and talk about something that is content related, and it's something we've been trailing now for weeks, but it is actually finally happening very, very soon, possibly even this week, which is we are going to be relaunching Patreon. We're going to be introducing new tiers. We're going to be introducing what I would say is a lot of fan service to the people who really like what we do. And that's kind of something which I'd really like to talk about for a little while. So let's start by talking about the Discord that we've got, where basically a lot of people have joined. There's a really positive, thriving community there of people who really like what we do. And we talk to them on a daily basis. So, if you want to get involved, get involved. But it's actually been a really good two-way exchange of ideas. And we haven't rushed this Patreon relaunch because we want it to be fan service. We want it to be stuff that's going to be appealing to people. So, our base tier is going to be pretty much the same, except there will be more Patreon site posts. We're already seeing that thanks to Audi. We are going to be having a higher tier, which will potentially open the door to early access. But I should stress that everything pretty much is still going to be appearing on the main channel. There might just be a time delay there. And of course, there's going to be much more in the way of interaction with the team. And we're already demonstrating the interaction with the Supporter Q+A section in this weekly show. And this weekly show only exists because of the Patreon supports. There's a lot going on there. And this has been really interesting to develop. We're going to be doing some behind-the-scenes content. So, it's not actually stuff that's going to detract from other content appearing on the channel. It's going to be stuff that's happening in parallel. We just turn on the camera pretty much as we do for this direct.
Well, I can finally show how I have my crazy setup.
Yeah.
Maybe give some indication on how all that works.
And there's stuff that we research behind the scenes. I've been doing a lot of stuff on AI upscaling. So John set me the challenge of AI upscaling the Metal Gear Solid 2 trailer. That will be appearing in the Patreon relaunch at some point. And a lot of interesting stuff happening there. And also, again, this two-way exchange of ideas. We were talking about our archive of stuff that goes way back to, I think it starts around 2009, 2010. But we've got a whole bunch of archive material from stuff that used to be used in our Eurogamer articles, stuff that was used in embedded videos on Eurogamer that doesn't exist. We've got pristine quality versions of all of that stuff. And one of our Patreon supporters said, well, why don't you kind of remaster it? Give us the best quality of the old stuff. And I thought to myself, well, this is something that is actually very easy to do, that would have value, that would actually preserve our archive and share it.
Yeah, that would be cool, especially because up until, I can't remember the year, but YouTube didn't support 60 frames per second
for
playback.
Sure.
And also the bit rate on those older YouTube videos is atrocious. The quality is very bad.
Exactly, yeah. So this is something else that we can provide to supporters that's, I think, is going to go down really well. And it's also great for us to dig back into the archives and take out some of those key games that, I was looking at the hard drive collection the other day. I saw Final Fantasy 13 on PlayStation 3 and 360. Wow, that was a hornet's nest back in the day. But those assets were never actually shown in decent quality. So, we can do that. And I'm really excited by all of the stuff that we've got lined up for this sort of premium tier. But it is all about connecting with our biggest fans, and at the same time also opening the door to producing projects that may not be commercially viable in the current atmosphere, on the YouTube ecosystem, but do become a lot more viable when we have Patreon support. So I think last week we were talking about Tech Focus.
Yeah. So Tech Focus can be popular, but it can also not be, depending upon the topic. So Patreon supporters who have a keen interest in the technology and less about, just the relevance to the latest game that released, they're really interested in these things. And I'm really grateful that essentially through the Patreon tiers and all these other things that I'll be enabled to work on tech focused projects in the near future and also in the next coming months to years that I otherwise probably would not have had the time, let alone the energy or all these other things to work on. But, this buffer that Patreon gives us is just amazing. Yeah.
The other thing, of course, is that extra funds coming in means that we can actually go on the search for new contributors to do stuff that is kind of like DF staples that maybe we don't do enough of. For example, we don't cover every single PlayStation 5 release. I don't think we'd want to cover every single PlayStation 5 release, but there are certainly titles that we miss, that we kind of regret not doing. I mean, at the moment, I'm trying to find space for which has just had a Series X /S update, and I think it's already got a PS5 one. I'd love to cover that, but it's a case of finding the time to do it. And if we've got more contributors on board and more funds coming in to pay those contributors, then that makes that possible. But I think the thing that's, going to really excite a lot of people, and it kind of ties into the project you're working on now, John, is that we're also going to have a DF Retro tier, which is basically going to radically revamp what we're doing with Retro on the channel.
Yeah, and that's, I hope people enjoy that, because for me, that's something I've been wanting to do more of, because especially in the past year with the new consoles, I haven't had a chance to do nearly as many real episodes in that series. Yeah. So it's been to the point where I think it was just a small handful of them last year. Mm-hmm. And going forward, the idea for me at least is I want to start doing one big episode a month, in addition to various other things such as the DF pickup stuff, some Let's Plays with Audie, obviously we'll continue to have some streams, and various other stuff like that we have in the works. And it's basically a chance to do more of what I love. And I think there seems to be a decent number of people out there that also enjoy the retro stuff. Yes. So I'm very happy and grateful for that, because This is what's really exciting
I
to me.
just really want to quickly hype this, but I know what John's working on, and I actually did get a tear in my eye when I watched a little bit of it.
Should we say it? Should this what it is? I mean,
let's keep it under wraps for now.
It was mind-blowing. Let's just say that.
Well, it makes a lot of sense for this channel, we'll just say. And I've even, we'll see. I'm excited to finally get that out. And I have some other huge projects in the works. And obviously now that Audie's working with us, he can help more with like getting this stuff off the ground, since he's always a great teammate for doing this kind of content. So that's basically the thing for me.
And it is worth stressing that this is, basically being enabled because we've got support from people that love what we do and want to see more of it.
Exactly.
And it's also great for us because it enables us to diversify what we do and makes us happier doing our jobs, which is
precisely
pretty crucial because it, anybody who works on a YouTube channel or reads the discourse surrounding it will know just how difficult it is. And it can be a real grind. So the idea is really to start a much deeper relationship with our best and most committed fans. And again, just go to our Discord, see what's happening there. And there's a ton of stuff happening. It's just a fantastic atmosphere, a really good sense of give and take in terms of ideas and stuff. And it's just been a joy to actually sort of be revitalized in a way by some of that stuff.
And just one last thing to talk about the Discord is that I've gotten a lot of DMs through the Discord, or I've gotten a lot of kind of direct messages on the channel, which have helped our work become more accurate and more topical, and even just allowed me to essentially get an understanding of what's happening in the world, because I can't read every single news source all the time. But if someone tags me with something that, Alex, this seems really relevant to your interests, well, this is great, and I'm really grateful for that. So thank you, everyone on the Discord.
Exactly.
But yeah, I just want to get back to the concept. I mean, when I started in the games business, I was in magazines. You'd go to your local shop, you'd buy your magazine, and the magazine would have advertisements, just as YouTube has advertisements now. But fundamentally, you bought the magazine because you liked the content, you liked the authors, you got great information from it. The transition onto the internet has basically made all of that free, which has really shaken up the way things work. And slowly but surely, I think we're kind of transitioning back to a similar model to what we had in the past, where supporters are supporting their favorite creators. And I'm really hopeful that we can do something meaningful there that's just going to be great for our supporters and great for us too. But look out for that. We're going to be doing a video explaining everything there. We shall reveal John's mystery project. Alex's mystery video isn't related to the Patreon, but it's huge. It's a global exclusive. I'm hugely excited about it. And I'm really looking forward to the next week. But I think that's our content discussion for now. So let's move on to, and it's quite appropriate, Patreon Q&A. Okay, so first question here from Ben Skelly. New patron here. Last week, Alex mentioned how manual placing of light sources is labor intensive. How hard is ray tracing to implement for smaller studios or even indies? Do the consoles or major commercial engines have APIs/tools to make it easier?
I almost feel like I shouldn't be answering this question, but the developers should. And you can watch essentially it was like RTX or AAA for indies, it was called. I think it was at the GTC conference. You may have to sign up for the website, for the GTC website, register, but it doesn't actually require anything other than a registration to watch the video. And they had a panel of about, I want to say 6 different indie developers working with middleware engines, so something like Unreal or Unity, discussing about how essentially things like DLSS or ray tracing features enabled their project in some way. And usually it's about actually the speed of the project increasing or the fidelity of the project increasing. They could answer it much better than I would, but just on a theoretical level, I do think it makes a lot of sense that it is easier, because instead of having to go in, place a light or a reflection probe, or spend an hour baking a shadow or something like that in a scene, it would happen dynamically, systemically, and in real time, maybe to an even higher level of fidelity. That's kind of what the idea behind ray tracing is. And yes, the APIs or tools that make this easier are basically common sense because ray tracing works on physical principles, like you would, like when you adjust a light in your own room. That's what makes it easy. They don't actually need necessarily always an API or something like that in a middleware engine to explain how ray tracing works. But the thing that they have to worry about, and this is the harder part, and I still think developers are getting, again, it's going to take a bit of time, but they need some way to profile the game. The placing the light is the easy part now. Profiling the game to see where the kind of performance budget is being spent in the ray tracing is very important. It can be very counterintuitive why, especially across different hardware vendors, why ray tracing is slow in this scene, but not in another. And that's something that NVIDIA, AMD, and I guess the middleware engines also need to get better at, about kind of informing the person turning on ray tracing why it's expensive here and not expensive there. So I hope maybe this answers your question a bit, but I definitely do recommend checking out that GTC video that I mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, we've already got a situation with Unreal Engine 4 where Mortal Shell got ray tracing and DLSS simply because it's built into the engine. That's a really small developer there who's, can tap into those features. Yeah, interesting stuff there. Next question. Again, I think you might be best suited for this one, Alex, from Adrian. Hello, he says. My question is this. Is there any particular reason why DRS is usually absent on PC, dynamic resolution scaling that is, of course, when a game's console counterpart has an implementation of it? Take Crysis Remastered and Neo 101 and 2, for example. Just a curious thought. Thanks.
The one technical reason for this is that there's currently no way in DirectX or Windows to have a great understanding of events out of the control of the game that could come in and adjust, like, let's say, the CPU or GPU time for one frame. And that is something developers, I think, just on an ideological or conceptual level don't like. So they don't want to implement necessarily the same DRS system they have on console, because if one of these events from the background comes in and adjusts the frame time of one single frame, it could adjust the dynamic res for that frame in a way that they're not happy with. They want more control. And I think that's one of the reasons why, usually. That's one of them, but there are technical ways around this. Intel put out a presentation a couple of years ago about leaving a GPU marker or something like that, where you have really good understanding of what's actually happening in the Windows environment. Obviously, there's a lot of really great successful examples. Gears of War, Titanfall with an absolutely amazing DRS system on PC. So it is it's 100% doable. It's just I think there's a level of ideological worry on the one side. And another difference too, I think, is actually just platform differences of what they think users like. And it's another, they don't think PC users like the idea of scaling because they're closer to the screen or something like that. Or, maybe they also think it's just another option in the menu that we'll have to QA about. There's development resources there. I think actually on a really hardcore technical level, it's really doable, and we already have great examples of it, but then it becomes more of a production standpoint question. Do we want this for our PC users? Do we want to spend the time developing it right? All these other things, Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's also an interesting point in that typically for a console game, they would be tailoring DRS to 30 or 60 frames per second. Mm-hmm. Whereas on PC, you really have to sort of expand the remit almost to cover the high frame rate.
When they have that, they usually have sort of a slider to set sort of your target,
which I like a lot,
right?
yeah.
Where it's which is great. It's okay, I want to hit 120, so adjust the scaler to work for this value. Mm-hmm. But yeah.
Yeah, going completely from memory here, and I might be wrong, but I did ask this question to Bungie when they produced Destiny 2 on PC. Mm-hmm. And I think they mentioned, again, I can't say for sure, there was some sort of memory management issues as well that they had to factor in.
We saw this with Far Cry 5 on PC, if you remember, Rich, where turning on DRS technically requires a lot more previous frames to be usually in the memory and things like that, so they can balloon out memory considerations, and they don't want to worry about it if it's like pressuring their texture memory or something like that. So maybe that's another reason why, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, let's move on. Next question from Stephen, and might be a good one for you, John. Once VRR is real, stressed, on PlayStation 5 and common in TVs, would it be best for developers to make all the games have unlocked frame rates and just run VRR?
I think the answer is simple. We need options, essentially, because you can't assume that all users will have this feature, even when it becomes more common. So I think the big thing is, going forward, there should always be an option to sort of let the frame rate run free, so to speak, up to a limit, because, if you're ranging from like 40 to 120 frames per second, even with VRR, that's not great. That causes a lot of other issues. But, I would like to see uncapped frame rates more often as an option, specifically targeting VRR displays, because 45 to 60 FPS looks terrible on a non-VRR display, in my opinion. But with VRR, it looks phenomenal. So if you can't hit that without VRR, then you should have at least provide the user an option to cap the frame rate to, say, 30 FPS or something in that instance. It really is just about options.
Well, let's consider something like Forza Motorsport, where they target that game to run locked at 60 frames per second, and there's a huge amount of engineering effort that goes into making sure that it effectively never drops a frame on a console. Do you think that there's the danger, by relying on VRR, that it might actually I don't know.
Yeah, I've worried about this as well, and you're right. There is this fear of using something like VRR as a crutch, so
exactly,
to speak.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's obviously going to vary depending per developer, I would imagine, in terms of what they're targeting. So I don't know if there's any real blanket statement there, but I could see a scenario where that might occur, where you could see, well, we don't have the time, budget, or manpower to further optimize this, so we'll just rely on VRR to sort of pick up the slack.
Yeah, I think
that would be tempting, I'd imagine.
I think one thing that would happen is, if as soon as like a lot of frame locks are gone, either from 30 or 60, you would see a lot of engines have really poor frame health, like where I would say, so think about VSync, like it's dropped, if you're at 60, it's at 16.6 ms at 60 hertz, but then 33.3 is the next one it can actually drop down to for 30 FPS. In between there's actually a lot of values that a frame could be produced at. I think with a lot of engines, sometimes when you unlock the frame rate, there's actually a lot of frames that are a lot longer than others, but VSync hides it well enough where you just think, oh, it's one frame drop or something like that, or it's not even showing up. So I think also VRR, if they just left frame rates unlocked at times, we would see like people really complaining about the way games look, because they're like really jittery or have more weirdness than they might have expected.
I think unlocking the frame rate would have to be like up to a specific cap, I would say, depending on your target. Like if you're like in the 40 to 60 range most of the time, I think it's okay to have an uncapped frame rate up to 60 hertz. But like removing that cap entirely and allowing it to go all the way to 120, then you'd probably get a lot of inconsistencies in those frame times, which you would still notice with VRR.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on to the next question from Paul Pastor. Was there ever a video you released that you feared was too niche for your general audience, but ended up exceeding your expectations in reception or view count? I think the answer is yes. And John, what do you reckon?
Man, that's difficult. I'm sure there was some really good answers for this, but the first one that comes to mind is something like when we did a video on the CDI.
Yeah.
And it actually did pretty well.
Defined pretty well.
It was like about 90,000 views.
That's good.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty good for a CDI video. Come on now.
There are some ones that do spring to mind. Remember that Sonic 2 HD one that you did, John?
Oh, yeah, that one.
I don't remember
the last
that.
time I looked, Well, why don't you talk about it for a bit, John? What was the content there?
If I recall, that was looking at Sonic 2 HD and also possibly the PC version of Sonic 06 or something. One of those. I was just looking at Sonic games sort of being refreshed on the PC, and that did extremely well. Along the same lines was that video we did on the Halo 2 E3 presentation.
Right. Yeah, that one's huge, where, actually.
Just kind of looking back at the trailer and the realities of it and what the final game ended up shipping with and comparing the two, and that really went over well. People liked that. And also maybe, I guess, when we did those E3 conference videos, which we should do more of, by the way, especially that first one I think we did on this, was it
2006?
One, I think?
2006.
Yeah, that was
2005.
That was great because we were actually all in the same room together, and it was Alex's first real contribution, really.
That's right.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's one's very special in my heart. Videos that were too niche. I think there were videos where there's a certain content type that doesn't generally tend to do well. So developer interviews, they can either do quite well, they can just not really shift the needle at all, but then sometimes something big will happen. And I think one thing that really made me do a double take and made me kind of punch the air in joy was the DF developers about Ori and the Will-o'-the-Wisps, where the last time I looked at it, it was like on 195,000 views, and I just sent a message to John on Slack saying, "John, have you seen this? This is amazing."
Oh, yeah.
It was like, wow. But that is a really good. I mean, we didn't expect huge views for that, but a lot of love and effort, not just from John, but also from Moon Studios. That content was awesome, and I'm just really glad that it did find an audience. But did I fear that it was too niche for the general audience? Absolutely, yeah. And I think also when we started to do the DF Weekly Direct, it's like, well, are people going to hang around and listen to or watch us for 90 minutes just talking about stuff that we fancy talking about? And that's done, sort of exceeded my expectations as well. So I'm very grateful about that. Anything on your perspective, Alex?
I guess a couple of tech-focused things fall under this, but not looking at those. Sometimes they do better, sometimes they do worse. The one that I think of is when I did Command & Conquer Remastered last year. I thought, for one, everyone always says RTS is dead. It was destroyed by MOBAs and then destroyed by esports. There's no huge RTS games coming out since like 2008 almost, 2009, 2010. That's like the last really big ones that like mainstream gaming press got on. I'm talking about really mainstream gaming press. And then that comes out, and I thought it would do a small number and I would be kind of wasting my time a little bit on the video, even though I loved the video and I loved the game. I thought it would just be like, oh, it comes out and kind of like a remaster of some other game from the 90s. This is just watched by a few people, but it like really picked up. And I think that one right there was just the for some reason, the upgrade was so obvious and so nice that it looked really good. And also, it sounds weird, but the video was really tight. The way I edited it, it was like, I think it was like 12 minutes long or something like that. It's not even very long of a video covering a remaster of a game. But I think the kind of like soundbite level of the video where it was just like, this is what it is. This is how good it looks. This is what it does. I think that helped a lot instead of being meandering. And I can talk at length for a lot of things. Yeah.
Good stuff. Well, next question, Oliver McKenzie. It's a long question. It's got 2 paragraphs. What's going on here? Do you think we will see image reconstruction solutions that are comparable to DLSS on next-gen consoles? DLSS can generate high-quality, high-resolution images for a fraction of the cost of native rendering. Yes, we know that. Obviously, the consoles don't have dedicated machine learning hardware, but do you think running ML on the shaders would be viable for a similar technique? Or do you think non-ML solutions, we suspect it's non-ML anyway, like AMD Super Resolution, or do you think non-ML solutions like AMD's Fidelity FX Super Resolution or checkerboarding or upsampling will be competitive with DLSS? Alex?
Okay, do I think they'll be comparable? a lot of things can be compared. So yes, they will be comparable. But I do think one of the reasons why DLSS is so good is because they're using like lower level int8 ML instructions on the GPU that are really, really fast on RTX GPUs due to the tensor cores. I think that is one thing that makes it extremely viable on RTX GPUs. I do think that even with not having tensor cores in the consoles, I do think something like Xbox Series X's machine learning acceleration, even though much less, will offer a competitive technique that will be good, and they will actually want to leverage ML with it because it solves certain problems that are really good. It'll just be a tiny bit slower or have less detail in certain aspects. That's essentially what I imagine. In the other aspect of this question, whether or not something not using ML will do just as good, the thing is, I don't know really if that's possible at the current rate, because it would require a lot of investment, just like from a research standpoint, to make something that doesn't work with every game out there. DLSS is like, due to the research behind it and the way it trains now, it's like game agnostic. And since it applies at the level of TAA, it's really friendly to modern engines. I think a competitive solution would need the same amount of research time and broad applicability to be competitive. And I don't think things like checkerboarding offer that. And typical TAA upsampling techniques, they require some sort of level of like super tuning for game content sometimes, or even artist content, that DLSS usually will actually just work around by the nature of it being ML based for certain aspects. So I don't think so. And I definitely don't think checkerboarding, because actually I want to say this really quickly just because checkerboarding is really great, but I think it's almost like a bit of history at this point, because the ideas behind it and the way it fails is particular. And I don't like its fail case. Like when checkerboard has a fail case, it leaves the checkerboard artifact across the image. When something like TAA upsampling fails, it just looks lower res. And I think that is something that developers prefer as well. I do think we're going to see a lot less checkerboarding over time for image reconstruction. It'll still be used though for things like denoising or checkerboard patterns for SSR or something like that. But I think the future is for image reconstruction. It is in machine learning, some aspect of the reconstruction algorithm. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to be fascinated to see how this plays out, because we know Microsoft is working on something. The extent to which we're actually going to see something and how good it's going to look, we just don't know. But yeah, big question there. And essentially your answer, Alex, is no.
Yeah, it is a little bit of a no, just because, I don't know, it just requires so much investment and energy to make these things look good. And NVIDIA has had the time and energy and money to do it. So...
Yeah, but again, I'll just say the Insomniac temporal upsampling solution really does look good. I guess the question is really, is that a sort of engine or content specific technique that just works well with that specific art style and that specific engine? But I guess the techniques that are being used for temporal upsampling are just kind of universal. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
I think they are pretty universal. And I think to say it's really good, I mean, it produces an image that we enjoy. But to say something is actually good, like effective from a research angle, would be to put it next to the raw 4K version of it and then a super sampled version of it and say what it is, how effective it is. That's what they do with DLSS and all these other image reconstruction techniques. So one thing I would actually like to see would be Spider-Man upscaled with different techniques to see how it fares and how it looks, or if it looks better or worse, and all these things. So
yeah, I guess that was the thing, because with DLSS, I think it was the Neo video which kind of comprehensively sort of demonstrated that it is actually on par, if not better than native rendering, and it's not basically just a better rendition of TAA, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, that's
it's come a long way, because the older iterations of DLSS we're definitely not there. So they've continued to refine and improve it, and it's in a remarkably great spot.
Yeah, happy with it.
Yeah. Okay, final question from Daniel Foss. Who came up with the name Digital Foundry? I think that one's fairly simple. What was the inspiration for the name? Well, I came up with the name Digital Foundry because I founded the company in late 2003, I believe. The inspiration for the name is really simple. I couldn't call it Digital Forge. Because that was the original name I wanted to come up with, but it was because at the time we have to kind of remember that Digital Foundry wasn't anything to do with what we're doing today. It was a company I put together for broadcast solutions, bespoke DVDs, bespoke videos, that kind of thing. The name kind of makes a bit more sense for that, and it just kind of persisted into when we were doing our initial platform comparisons and the bespoke capture solutions we used way back then. So that's kind of the origins of the name. But I can see there's quite a lot of something we'll do in the Patreon where we'll talk about the origins of Digital Foundry, because there is still some material from way back then that we can actually show, which might prove interesting. But I guess that's it for this show. Thanks for joining me on this one, John.
Of course.
We can all get back to work now, but it's been nice to meet up with you guys for the morning, and thanks to you, Alex.
Of course, they're Rich.
And that door, it's got to be opened at some point. What's going on behind there?
We'll see what happens in about a week or two.
Hordes of
frogs in there.
Hordes of majestic wildebeest.
We'll see.
In the background there. We'll have to see. Maybe that could be a Patreon exclusive. Anyway, we're going to wrap this up for now. If you did like the content, please like, subscribe, and indeed share. Ring the bell for instant notifications whenever new Digital Foundry content drops. And yes, please do consider the Patreon. And we'll have more on that soon. But that's all from us for now. Thanks for watching.